Welcome to VeloUnlocked, the podcast for baseball players that want to play at the next level. Baseball is already one of the most difficult sports to succeed in. Our goal is to dive into as many areas as possible, both on and off the field, to give you the upper hand against your competition. Be sure to check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Velo University for much more. In this episode, we are joined by Dean Jackson. Dean is a former minor league pitcher with 5 arm surgeries under his belt. Fueled by his desire to finally get healthy, Dean spent 7 years at Driveline Baseball working in the pitching, strength and conditioning, physical therapy, and R&D departments focused on improving the industry's approach to player development. As the director of special projects at Driveline, Dean focused on using biomechanics to map the kinetic chain in the pitching motion, revamped the industry standard return to throw protocol, and applied strength and conditioning concepts to throwing programs to increase athletic performance improvements. All right, episode 4, let's get into it.
All right, Dean. Hey, man. Thanks so much.
What's up, man? Yeah, thanks for having me out. It's always good to come out here and hang out.
Yeah. I mean, minus the fact that it's New York, but yeah.
It's all right. It's good. It's good. It's nice weather out here right now.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah, you did bring it. You stopped the rain. Look at you.
Yeah, well, I'll take it. Sure.
All right, so we are. I'm just excited to go through this whole carousel that is like this career you've had, and I love. There's so many points in here that just speak so deep to the things that I love, and but you gotta do me a favor and go through this injury list because I couldn't memorize it.
Yeah. Okay, so easy stuff like shoulder impingement when I was a kid, and that's all the way through Little League, high school, stuff like that. Started getting into big stuff in college, hip labor repair. Then was injury-free till senior year of college, and then getting into pro ball, that's when the elbow started having some big issues. So basically tried to avoid surgeries by doing some stem cell injections and PT. Didn't work. So did a UCL repair. That didn't fix the pain. Then we did an ulnar nerve transposition. That didn't fix the pain. Did an exploratory where they realized they kind of messed up some stuff on one of the other surgeries. So then we went back in and redid the ulnar nerve transposition. That didn't fix the pain. And then recently Tommy John with Dr. Erickson, obviously, as you know. So what is that now? 5 elbow surgeries, a hip surgery, throw a few nasal surgeries in there for some other problems. Have, I don't know at this point, probably 10 injections, regenerative injections into that elbow. It's been a ride. It's been a lot.
Yeah. Wow. What out of those, right? Let's go back. Would you say like probably the first traumatic one was the hip?
That was, you say traumatic?
Like just so whenever we think of injury, right, I immediately think of the fact of time.
Yeah.
Right. Anytime I hear the word injury, I'm like, okay, time. The next thing that pops into my head is like identity, right? Because it's like, hey, I've just been injured. How much time is this going to prevent me from doing what I prescribe as my identity?
Sure.
And so like when I say traumatic, I mean to your path that you thought you were going to be going on.
Yeah. I would say the UCL repair, the first elbow injury, I would say that's the biggest one. The hip was really hard because I was in college at the time and I had just started throwing hard. Like this was like 2013, 2014. So I was 19 years old throwing 97, which was like big back then. Now it's a lot of people do that, and it's like, okay, you do that, can you pitch? But back then it was like, this is a big deal.
Yeah.
You know? So that definitely hit the identity, but I would say what hit the identity more was the elbow right after my first season of pro ball. Because right then I had just come from, go from an NAIA school to an undrafted free agent. And then my first season of pro ball, I'm an all-star. And then get a promotion to the next level, dominate at that. So there was a lot building. It's like, okay, now I've built this confidence, this understanding of like, no, what I want to do is actually possible. Like I can go and get this. All I need to do is just like throw a little bit harder. And then on the path to doing that, pop the UCL, and then everything went crazy from that point. Because you have all these things you stack up a bunch of wins and you don't realize that it's going to correct at some point. And it corrected very hard, and then not only corrected, crashed below what it should have been. But that one was the hardest.
What an interesting way to put that, right? So it's going to correct, right? Because it's not this just as any program, right? From a lifting perspective, from a training perspective, from a rehab perspective, is not a linear progression, nor is success. The unfortunate thing is oftentimes when we're in the middle of success, we just presume this is continuous.
Normal. Yeah. I see it all the time. I mean, this is getting ahead of myself, but I do a bunch with guys that are training now. Return to throw is kind of one of my niches that I do really well on. And I see it every time. They'll have their out of norm day. Like, let's say it's a return to throw. Let's say the guy used to throw 95 and they're coming back from Tommy John, and they have a day where they're like, man, I threw harder than I have the whole rehab. I was 85 today. It's felt great. And then in my head, I'm like, okay, that's over what they should be at, right? In their head, they're like, well, what if I did that again and again?
Yeah.
So in their head, they're like, well, I'll be 95 really soon. And it's like, no, you're going to crash right after this. So it's really interesting. You see people stack it up. They have these wins, and they think that all these wins are now bringing them to a new norm, when in reality, that's just above your norm. And your norm is getting better because you're training and you're doing a lot of things right.
Right. You're
but
pushing the floor.
Not at that rate. Not that fast.
So how do you think since we drafted into that sort of lane here, how do you think a young athlete prevents that sort of overcompensation of, I guess, it's excitement, but it's this naivete to the way the world is actually going to work? Yeah,
I think there's no way around it.
I was just about to ask, or do you think it's necessary?
Well, it's absolutely necessary. You're going to ride the roller coaster. And I think the reason you are going to ride the roller coaster is because you don't actually have the context necessary to understand what's going to happen. You and I do now. We've been through this thing. So let's say you started training again for Olympic lifting and you hit a number that's like above a number you should hit, and people would be all pumped. And you'd be like, yeah, but it's not really real because I'm about to tank here real fast. You would understand that.
I'm going to feel like dog shit tomorrow.
100%. Yeah. But an 18-year-old Nick Serio would be like, I'm going to be the best, So I think it's experience. So you need to experience these things. But how you kind of hedge yourself against not having the experience is you get someone like you, like me. It doesn't have to be one of us, just someone who's been there, done that, and who has the experience, so they can pull you in a little bit and show you what reality is. I mean, that's what the point of a coach. I really hate using the word coach because I think it undervalues what they actually do. Like
it's a mentor.
Yeah, much better word. So because they've been through it, they understand. They've seen it happen over and over and over again, and they give you a much more accurate view of what reality really is. And like we talked about last night, if you're trying to play chess, for example, and you think every piece is worth different amount of points. So for people who don't know chess, queen is worth like roughly 9 points, and a knight would be worth like 3 points. If you think those are reversed, it doesn't matter how smart you are, you're going to be bad at chess.
Right.
So one of the points of the mentor is to make sure you have an accurate understanding. How many points are each of these pieces worth? What does the strategy look like? And then give you an accurate understanding of what that looks like in your realm. So then you can make better decisions, understand the reality of things the way they really are. So you can make you don't have to ride the roller coaster as much. You know what's real and what's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What a great point. I mean, it reminds me, I always like doing some background on everybody, even if I know them really well, right? Because I want to bring up just, I guess, topics that maybe they were thinking about really strongly at some point in their life. And then what's intriguing to me is if I've heard that change in the future. But regardless, this topic in particular, I remember a post that you put out a while ago, My Greatest Regret, and it's on this topic, right? So, and finding that coach and that one that you can really trust, and build that layer of trust with, is so critical to the development process. And it's so obvious because if I just take it from this perspective to those who are very self-driven and really, really, intellectually sound too and want to go out and get a ton of their own information, I commend the hell out of you. Here's the biggest problem with doing that all on your own. You only have one perspective.
Yeah. And you only have a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
So that's the one thing that I think people don't realize. And yeah, going back on my biggest regret was not having a mentor sooner, because I wanted to go out. I had the drive. I had the smarts, and I was going to go out, and I had the natural talent for sure. And I was going to go out and I was going to make myself into a big leaguer, and no one was going to help me. I was going to do it all on my own. And that was just such a dumb decision. Because yeah, all those things may be true, but the reality is I have one life, and me as a kid, I haven't lived very much of it, right? You, in your late 30s, you lived your life and then have helped all of these other athletes with theirs. So you may have 1,000 times the experience that I would have at that period of time. And then I would overvalue my experience compared to 1,000 times just because it's mine and it's more personal to me. But that's just stupid. If someone has 1,000 times the experience in something that you do, they can help you a lot. And yeah, okay, it costs money. But that's the reality, is you're trading value for value. You're getting value in terms of dollars, and they're getting value in terms of experience that helps them become just massively shorten the amount of time that it takes to get or to get better. So I feel very strongly in that for sure.
Yeah, and it's amazing, right? Because at the end of the day, that sounds so logical. And most issues we run into, especially when referencing young athletes, is for some reason, and parents are not dumb. Parents got to that point by not being dumb, or at least smart enough to stay alive, right?
Sure.
Yet they make illogical choices sometimes, listening to people that it's just like, wait a minute, step back and try and figure out whether or not that was a logical piece of advice you just got there, instead of just blindly trusting.
Sure. And I think that's really tough too, because I think about this a lot. Trying to navigate who to have as your coach or mentor, I think is really, really difficult, because then, okay, it's the same problem we just talked about, but now there's no coach or mentor for it, because it's like, you don't have enough experience to know who is a good coach and mentor.
Sure.
Like you and I can hear anybody in baseball talk and know if they know what they're talking about or not, right? But a lot of most parents can't.
Yeah.
So the disappointing reality is, in finding a mentor, you gotta bounce around. Like I tell this to a lot of my trainees is just like, look, it doesn't matter if it's with me or with somebody else. Find somebody that you want to learn. They have said something that you want to learn what that is, and then pay them to learn it. And then if you dive in and you realize, this isn't like quite what I thought it was going to be, or this person doesn't quite know what I thought they did, that's totally fine.
Yeah,
like,
at the end of the day, you learned.
Fine. Yeah, and in that, you have built your own model of understanding. Now, the next time something like that comes up, you're going to be like, I remember this last time. Let me ask these questions before I commit financially to this person. So in that, you've made yourself better, and all that costs money. And if that's the only reason that you don't want to do it, that's a terrible reason.
Right.
So absolutely. If you actually care about accomplishing what you want to accomplish, putting money in front of that is stupid. Like, absolutely not. So
let's go back we're now at the point where we've had this, you did a couple stem cell injections prior to that.
Yeah, stem cell injections, hydrodissections, trying to split up the scar tissue because I make a bunch of scar tissue, and all those, I just grouped them into regenerative injections. Got PRP in there too.
Okay. So, and all of those, there's some, there's moderate research behind them. There's not a ton. They're all pretty much, exploratory, and they, most doctors shout out like, 50% work, 50% don't for most people. But these are all, what we would call like almost non-operative opportunities to trying to stay away from getting the UCL repair.
Yeah.
Cool.
And then the repair was trying to stay away from the Tommy John. So as you could see, as you see my decision-making process, it was dumb, which is just like, what is the least amount of time possible? Not what is the truth? What is the actual problem? And what do we need to do to solve that? It's like, what's the least amount of time that might solve the problem? Which obviously that's one of the reasons it took so long.
And speaking to that, so that everybody understands, a repair, the difference between the repair and then the actual full surgery is going to be, the repair is basically taking a collagen sheath and putting it over and trying to utilize the native ligament, whereas a full replacement is going to take a separate ligament, whether it's from you or cadaver, and putting it in, and then, stitching you up. The timeline differences, I think, are what, like
it's
9?
like in half.
Yeah, it's like 9 to 18, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's the only thing that I heard, right?
Right.
So you tell somebody,
And some repairs do work.
Yeah. Some are totally fine.
Yeah, it's probably a little more difficult for them to work in somebody who can throw 100 miles an hour as opposed to somebody who's throwing 90.
Yeah, and there's also significantly less research just from the amount of time that the surgery has been out.
Yeah, the repair has existed.
At the time when I got it, nobody knew what the best baseball pitchers on the planet, how they were going to respond to that surgery. Nobody knew. So sure, there was a lot. Excuse me. Sure, there was a lot on younger kids. Or younger kids is the wrong term.
Novice throwers.
Yeah, novice throwers.
Yeah.
That, yes, this is viable, this is a thing. But when I got it, I don't think anybody who threw 100 had gotten it yet.
Right.
So it was...
By the way, still a major problem in research that we call expert throwers, anybody over like, 75, 80.
Yeah, of course.
But they can come to our building, and that's a majority of the high school athletes we have in the building, and not one of them are expert throwers.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so now we get the surgery. Mm-hmm. You're in college, right? Correct at this point? Or no, you're in pro ball.
Well, yeah, and I was released right before I got it.
Oh my God.
So there's a loophole. So if you get hurt in the off season, I'm not sure how it is now because with the whole minor league unionizing stuff. But at the time, if you got hurt in the off season, you could be like your contract was essentially void.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you got hurt technically doing
training.
What? Training.
It was long tossing.
Wow. And you felt it.
Yeah. And it was odd because I didn't think it was my UCL because it just felt like I threw the ball and it felt like my elbow just kept extending. That was it. It just didn't I didn't throw and stop and feel fine. It was like my elbow just kept going past end range. So I thought I just banged at the back, and that kept us off the UCL for a long time. And then on the imaging, it was like, it's fine. It doesn't.
Well, see, that's always the problem too. At that time, the doctor looking at it was a professional baseball doctor.
Yeah, he was the head guy for the very good surgeon.
Right.
Yeah.
So used to looking at elbows of Major League Baseball players, right? And I think an important thing to note right here, he's saying, it looks fine and everything like that, because when you're taking an MRI of a guy who throws, and especially who throws as hard as you do, that entire thing is going to look like a car crash.
Yeah.
So, compared to the average person, sure, yes, everything is wrong and we need to go in and fix everything. But it doesn't necessarily mean that's the mechanism that's causing discomfort.
Sure. And then one of the tough parts too, we obviously talk about this a lot. One of the tough parts of an MRI is it's a static image.
Yeah.
But when you throw, it's a dynamic loading. So you're moving versus being still. And that was one of the problems that Erickson, when he did my recent Tommy John, noted was, it looked all nice and pretty when it wasn't loaded. And then we applied a stress to it, and that thing gapped up immediately and didn't do its job, essentially. So,
did he use ultrasound in diagnosing you at all?
Yeah, but it was very, I could tell the person doing it, even though they were a baseball doctor, they were one of the guys who this is what they do, right? I could tell that they weren't necessarily comfortable or knew what they were looking at. Does that make sense? It's they knew how to do the test. And the doctor's a very good doctor. But I could tell that it was something he didn't have a lot of experience in. And I think it was just because it hasn't been standard practice. So fast forward a couple years, and these diagnostics for the UCL are going to be great because it's okay, they actually understand, can we see what's happening to this thing while it's under this very specific type of load?
Yep.
And that'll clear things up a whole lot more, obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just hard. I mean, it's just hard to diagnose injuries. By no means am I sitting here being like, oh, they're bad at their jobs. Like, they're great at their jobs. The problem is just very difficult. And you get these gray area cases like me. They're just hard. It just is what it is. And yeah, it sucks. And yeah, I then spend 6 years trying to figure out the problem and rehabbing. But it's like, okay, it's not my fault. It's not their fault. It's no one's fault. It's just a hard problem. And like, you just got to deal with it.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I can't tell you how many times we've had guys where, with dealing with high school athletes, you lose a lot of control during the season. So you're dealing with basically 3 to 4 months of like where even if you are programming for them, they're at the mercy of what's going on in practice, in games, and then they're in games, and you want this kid to be competitive, so you can't stop him. But I can't tell you how many times we've had a kid feel something in his elbow after a game, come in, and we've either myself or one of our docs has run him through sort of a manual testing, and we're just all like, oh my God. Imaging shows nothing. Kid's better in a week, but flunked every single, manual test, and then UCL is totally fine. And we've had the opposite. Kid feels absolutely amazing, can't figure out where the discomfort is, goes in, and when they get him under the knife, and they're like, this thing was obliterated.
yeah.
And it's just amazing how difficult that one ligament seems to be, or that grouping really seems to be to diagnose.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the big, I get, especially from high school and college kids, I get a lot of questions on Instagram where they're like, hey, I'm about to go through Tommy John, I'm about to go through this surgery. Like, do you have any advice or things like that? And it's like, yeah, the best advice I can give you is don't put yourself in a position to get it in the first place, which nobody watching this is going to listen to me. And they're just going to, because there's no reason to actually care at this level about something when it doesn't affect you. So until you've been hurt, you don't understand how big of a deal it is. And I guarantee you there's going to be double-digit people watching this who are going to hear this and be like, oh, that makes sense. And they're going to get hurt and be like, oh, I should have listened. It's just how it works.
Yeah.
And it's wild. And that's the biggest piece of advice I can give to high school, college age kids is like, no, getting hurt is not a joke. It's not this nice, easy thing. It's not this nice solved thing where, oh, I just go to the doctor. They tell me exactly what to do. They look at my pictures. It tells me exactly what it is. And they tell me exactly how long it's going to take. And I just do what they say. And then I get better. That isn't how it works. The second you get hurt, it's all up in the air. It's all this abstract, nebulous thing where everybody's doing their best, but like there isn't a 100%, this is exactly what you need to do, exactly how long it'll take to get back to that. So if you're trying to think of, oh, should I risk it in this way, or should I risk it on this outing, or should I do it? The answer is just no. It's just absolutely not. And people just don't, like, that's the biggest problem in my head with young, like high school, college guys when it comes to training, is they don't actually understand how bad it is when you are hurt. Do not get hurt. And that doesn't mean don't do high level training, because we've obviously talked a lot about.
Yeah, you need the adaptation.
You need the adaptation. There's a lot of stress in the game. You have to train yourself to do that. Anybody who watches my Instagram and my content knows I have very stressful training stimuli. But it's making sure you're prepared for those things and understanding how big of a deal all of this is. Because if you get hurt, there's not this nice, pretty, it's all wrapped up in a box with a bow on it of how you get back. It just doesn't work that way.
Coming off of that, the understanding there, and I think what it really comes from is circling back to that naivete and the fact that they haven't spent a lot of time on this planet, right? So to them, time is not that much of a concern. The more you age, time becomes your quote unquote enemy, right? Especially if you don't know how to organize it well or organize yourself within it. And the value of time, I try and pound this into every one of our parents' heads, every one of our kids' heads, is enormous. I mean, I can go off on major tangents here why I think playing basketball or fall baseball are colossal wastes of time, because they're just not the correct stimulus that you need if you want to get to a certain place. But again, time is so crucial. So speaking of time, we were in this time period now. We got released. What a tumultuous, few months right there. That must have been like.
That was also the period of time where I was in the hospital with the migraine stuff. So
How closely you think those two are linked? Or were you in the hospital? Well, were you in the hospital while you were dealing with the stress of the fact that?
yeah, oh yeah. But for this isn't something I talk about a whole lot. It doesn't really matter. It just doesn't come up. I was in the hospital. So I've had migraines for years. You and I have already talked. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but had migraines for years. And not just headaches, full on migraines. So you can Google it if you don't know the difference. But I had a migraine after getting released, came out of it and forgot how to read type thing. So strong neurological problems. This side of my face was always numb. I literally couldn't do anything. Like I couldn't go to the grocery store on my own. I couldn't learn. The best way I can describe it is just like all the information that I had known previously was just like dumped. So it's like, if you think about a computer, like all the programs that you had running and like the notes that you had taken and all these different things and like whatever, it was all gone. And then my ability to learn new stuff was also gone. So I would go to the grocery store. It's like you go to a store for the first time. You don't know where anything is. You spend some time figuring it out. And you're like, oh, the apples are over there, right? Now, every time you go back to that store, you know the apples are over there. Every time I went back to that store, which by the way was the store that I had gone to my entire life anyways, I didn't know where anything was. So I would spend 15 minutes finding the apples, would find the apples. And then the next time would have to spend 15 minutes finding the apples again, like it was brand new. So that was happening at this time as well. So add that into the whole thing. It was a lot. Yeah. I assume now, knowing what I do know about stress, I was a catabolic machine. So I was like, and I didn't do anything wrong. Like it wasn't like I was a bad person doing things wrong. I just had severe problems in my physiology, like severe problems. Always breathe through my mouth, a complete inability to breathe through my nose. Always super high strung. Didn't understand when to apply stress, when to apply recovery, how much of each should be doing this. Terrible sleep apnea at the time, terrible sleep habits, just like anything that could make your physiology bad. I had it.
Right.
So it's like, everything was crumbling around me because I wasn't healthy.
And at the same time, still asking yourself to perform at an incredibly high level.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And doing so.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
So then
imagine how much you're taxing your system.
Yes.
Going out and asking it to do one of the most neurologically demanding things ever, which, by the way, if you're not aware of that, everybody listening, throwing a ball that hard is incredibly neurologically demanding.
Yeah.
It's incredible. And okay, so you combust.
Yeah.
And how do you pick yourself out of that moment?
And that was that when you talked about which surgery was the hardest, it was all that at that period of time.
Right.
It broke me a lot, like all the way, to the point where I was living on the couch at my girlfriend's dad's house, and because I didn't have a job, I couldn't work. Like I couldn't read. Who am I gonna, so I remember sitting on the couch, laying on the ground next to the couch, and I'm just sitting there. I just exist. And other people, I'm like fully dependent on other people. And it completely broke me all the way down to nothing. Like I can't do anything. Going from contrast that with less than a year earlier, I had that big rise, right? And now, undrafted free agent. Now I'm an all-star. I can actually achieve this goal. I can achieve the goal of being a big leaguer and play at the highest stage against some of the best people in the world. And now I can't even hold a job at Chipotle because I can't read. Like, pretty wild difference.
Yeah.
Less than a year in between the two. I don't have this nice, pretty, I mean, like people ask me this all the time about coming back from an injury. And there's this one piece of advice or this one conversation that I think back to with Casey Weathers. You familiar with Casey? Yeah. So Casey has the hardest pull down of all time at 107.8 with a baseball. Not on a hot gun. He sat 106, 106, 107, punched a 107.8. It was just an icon in the training industry. One of the first guys to come through in baseball training. And him and I are friends, and I had the opportunity to ask him the question. I'm like, Casey, because he had a bunch of elbow injuries. It's like, bro, how did you get through all that? And I was looking for what's the secret? How do you do, what's the shortcut that makes this easy? And I remember we were at a red light in his car, and he just looked at me, and he's like, what was my other option? And there was just silence. And I was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And the reality of that is there is no secret that he had. There is no like, oh, what's the way to make it through nice and easy where I'm not uncomfortable? The reality is, and she went on to explain a little bit later, was he was like, I wanted to become the best I could possibly be in baseball. So I sat there and I said, is that still the goal? Yes, that's still the goal. That's what I want. Okay, now what is my situation? My situation is this, and this. What's the next logical step I need to take? He's like, it didn't matter how long it was going to take. It didn't matter how uncomfortable I was. None of these things mattered because it's like I wanted that, and this is what it takes to do that. So are you going to do it or not? The reality is that sucks when you're faced with, okay, it's not going to be fun. There is no light at the end of the tunnel. I don't know how long the tunnel is. And you just take one step at a time. And that's the reality. It's not this nice, easy, pretty thing that people are going to feel happy about. It sucked. It's terrible. But then I came out the other end a significantly better person. It was very worth it. But like, you're not going to, I wouldn't choose to go through that process,
Right. You'd be choosing hell and
which is hard, Yeah. But that's kind of what I would say there is, I didn't have this nice, easy coping. It was really hard. I felt very alone through most of the time, which I think a lot of people connect with.
Even though you had a network.
Yeah. Oh, I had an amazing network. Oh my gosh. And I didn't even realize that at the time. I feel so terrible thinking back of like my mom, my girlfriend, my dad, my sister, like they would do whatever. Like I think my mom spent in the 5 figures of dollars to try and help me out at that period of time because I had zero money. I had spent it all trying to figure out my problems. So both my mom and my dad, the network was amazing. But yeah, even with the network, it was still very, very difficult. Very hard. I remember random so I went to the hospital to help with some migraine stuff, and we were at the Mayo Clinic, the best migraine doctor in the world, and they actually gave me a medicine that I was allergic to. So this whole thing is ridiculous, and so it caused severe anxiety. So I didn't sleep for 4 days straight, and Nicole stayed up with me. So that's my girlfriend, for people who don't know. I remember specifically, we were playing cards at 3:30 in the morning, and she yawned, and I was like, you can go to bed. And she's like, no, I'm good. Just like stayed up with me, like, and that's looking back at it, I'm like, wow, that's insane. Like, what would it have been if those people were not around me like that?
Right.
Because it was already insanely hard. Like, what would it have been if that wasn't there? Because that is ridiculous. You're telling me she's gonna be awake at 3:30 in the morning and play cards with me on like day 3?
Yeah.
Like, that's insane, But yeah, I'm glad you brought up the support group. I wish I would have leaned into them more than I did, to be honest with you.
Well, I think sometimes it's hard, right? You're coming from a world where you need to possess this ego, you need to possess this bravado, you need to possess this almost narcissistic, like self-awareness, right? Of I am the greatest. If you want to be the greatest, you need to believe that.
You want to play against the big boys and you don't have the talent. So like, I'll say things like, if you don't have the talent to play against the big boys, and people look at me and they're like, what are you talking about? Like, you throw in high 90s, you're 6'7", you're really athletic. And it's like, no, you don't understand the type of talent that big boys have. Mm-hmm. Like, I am not talented when it comes to, I'm not close to talented when it comes to the big boys. So yeah, you gotta walk around. You gotta understand that you are fighting people who are significantly better than you all the time.
Right.
So if you don't have that dog in you, for using today's phrases, you're going to get run over big time. So yeah, like we've talked about in the past, balancing that has been a big struggle as well.
Incredibly difficult, right? And it makes it probably very hard to welcome in your support group and your network, and it forces you almost to be alone at times, and almost want to lean into the suffering in some moments to feel something. How do you handle the doubt now, knowing you've gone through all that, and how much does that mean? The fact that you have gone through all these different stages and yet still persevere, or still strive to fight. How do you manage that?
Yeah, it's a lot simpler for me now because I use that framework that I described earlier that Casey told me, which is just, what do I want? Now, I want to be a big leaguer, but do I really have control over that? No. And why do I want to be a big leaguer? It's like, I don't really want to be a big leaguer. I want to be as good as I can be at baseball. And when I say that, I mean it. There's a lot of people who say that, they want to be as good as they can, and they're staying up till 2 a.m. playing video games and eating like crap. No, you don't. You're just saying it because it sounds nice. Like, if it took 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for me to be as good as I could possibly be, I would do it. And I do it. We talked about the amount of money that I'm contributing now towards things that help me get better. Like, it is the biggest expense it's 75% of my income goes. So I have, like, the car's paid off. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment with 4 roommates and Nicole and I share a car, and I eat most of my meals in, and it's like I spend as little money possible, so I have as much money possible to then go and talk to people and get things done and learn things and have opportunities to get different little procedures done, like all those hydrodissections that I had recently, because I fully commit that I will do whatever it takes to be as good as I can possibly be at baseball. I actually don't know how did we get there?
Well, no, it's just it's a very
cut that for me, Kenny. Save me. Cut that.
It's a very rationalized perspective, right? And I think most times people, and we've talked about this, right? These sort of 3 levels of your identity, right? When most people say, "I want to be a big leaguer," it's because they actually think that's what everybody else wants to hear.
Yeah. And that's the reason I do it is because I want it.
Yeah.
That's it. That's what I want my life to be.
So it's going extremely deep into your, what we would call our third identity, right? So like this second layer of your identity is probably your most intimate people are aware of that. And then there is a layer even deeper than that, right? Yeah. But that surface layer, I actually saw one of your other posts that I thought was really good. And it's don't believe all the hype that you watch on Instagram and, this rah-rahness of a lot of people. And, I've always tried to steer people away, using a statement that motivation is a drug and we all need rehab from it, because of the fact that, like, if you're just sifting through trying to find motivation to do what you're doing, then you need to reevaluate what your deeper identities are trying to say. Yeah. Because for you can see it, right? Yes, it happens to be what you provide out to the world as well. But I guess it's when you can truly tell something's part of somebody's identity, it's palpable. And then there's non-negotiating that goes on with most conformist type things, right? Like, I've been out to dinner with you, with others, and you refuse to drink. Yeah. And I don't, but I'm not training for something, and have kids. And so, like, there's these other things, though, that I've noticed how your day will actually conform around what's most important towards what you need to attend to and get done. And it's commendable. And I would venture to say probably even having that viewpoint and how deeply important that conversation with Casey Weathers was is probably a large piece of how you can rid off doubt, because it is so right now focused. Even though you've stripped away the fact that playing Major League Baseball is out of your control. But being the best you can possibly be actually transitions that from being this long sought out goal to well, what do I have to do today to be massively better than I was yesterday, or at least continue trending in the direction I am trending recently.
Yeah.
All right. So let's transition now to, you've gone through a couple of these surgeries, right? And you've had the revisions, you've done nerve transpositions, you've trained all through this period, right? But you've also started coaching throughout that time period, right? How is the benefit, like has coaching benefited you in terms of training?
Strongly.
Cool.
Strongly.
How so?
Same way that getting a mentor helps the athletes. So getting a mentor helps the athletes because you have significantly more experience than they do. And what does that mean? You've just like seen more stuff and solved more problems, right? So I have learned about myself that I don't learn very much unless there are problems to solve. If there are no problems to solve, I just don't do very much. I just don't. So when I have a problem, I fight like heck to solve it. And then I solve it, which is cool. And then I realize when other people that I care about have problems, I fight like heck to solve those too. And a lot of times those just become other puzzle pieces. And most of the time those puzzle pieces sit on the side of the board while you're working on the rest of the puzzle, right? But then every once in a while you realize like, oh shoot, that puzzle piece that's sitting over there fits right there. And that one that's sitting over there from another thing fits right there. And all of a sudden the dots start to connect and you start to be able to put these things together. So what coaching for me has done is from a strictly, because obviously it helps them. I really enjoy helping guys get a lot better.
Sure.
I help them achieve the goals that they want to achieve. That's very fun for me. I really like it. Really like the guys because obviously you put yourself around people who are driven. It's just fun for everybody, right? But also what it does for me is it helps me learn a huge amount. There's multiple problems in mechanics or understandings of the different things that I wouldn't actually know if I didn't have these problems to solve for other guys. And one I can think of specifically is a trainee of mine had some pretty severe back problems. So I had to learn everything I could possibly learn about the back to make sure that I was training him correctly. And in learning that, you end up learning all these different things. Holy crap, this thing that I learned here can be applied this way. This thing that I learned here can be applied over here. And all these things can be applied in these different areas. And if that guy wouldn't have had those back problems, I would have never known. I would have never gone and tried to look up those things. Why would I look up back problems? I don't have back problems, you know? But then in doing that, realize how much it actually benefits me from these other areas. So just gives me access to more problems, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool perspective on the way to look at just the continuous loop that can be problem solution and how that parallels into it. Your puzzle analogy, right? It is always a puzzle. What I think is troubling for some people is they want that puzzle to have borders already so that they can just fill in the inside. And the unfortunate thing is I don't think the puzzle ends.
No. And that's I'm glad you said that because that's one of the reasons I'm so dedicated to a lot of this stuff and in learning is because I truly do not believe that the information necessary for me to be as good as I could possibly be exists. So I think I have to go solve a lot of problems that have never been solved before. Some of them have been solved in other contexts, and there's a little bit of like a transfer over from some other areas, and you get a little bit of a head start. But a lot of the problems had not been solved before at all. Like one of the big kind of achievements or things that I've done mapping out the kinetic chain in throwing with some of my coworkers previously. That work that we did has never been done before. We were finding how different pieces moved that no one has ever seen before. And we're sitting there, I think back to some of the conversations we had, about like trying to solve different problems in our model of how we understood things. And those problems have never been solved. Those things have never, you can't just go read a book and be like, how do pitching mechanics work and get that information? Like it doesn't exist. And stuff like that, if you want to become as good as your genetics possibly allow, I truly believe that information doesn't exist right now. So in solving those problems for the other people, it then gives me more puzzle pieces to work with, because I need those puzzle pieces there to see what the whole thing looks like, because you're right, it doesn't have borders.
Yeah. So we're talking on those problems that you solve with buddies of yours. Now, like obviously you have this, anybody that knows you and, follows you on Twitter can see your deep allegiance to data and technology. And how impactful has that been in your training? I would say, because obviously I don't think you had access to that in college times, right? So how impactful do you believe that has been on your current training sort of ideologies?
Oh, incredibly. But I mean, I think people say the word data and they kind of get like, oh, that's not for me. That's for smart people, right? Yeah. Like data is just information.
Right.
Like data could be you and I sitting here, just like I have a picture of you in my head, or you say words, and it's all data that I remember.
Right.
It's just information, you know? So it just happens to be written down in numbers and in big spreadsheets. And when you compile a lot of numbers on a lot of different cases, you can then do cool stuff with computers where you go through and analyze massive amounts of information, which is really cool. And I think where a lot of people go wrong is I think they take those numbers, like let's say from a motion capture lab, for example. In the motion capture lab that I have experience with, it was a markered setup. So that means that they put the little dots on every guy, and the point of those dots are to identify different landmarks. So what is a landmark? Well, bony processes. So your elbow's here. So we have some markers there. Your for like all the different things, right? And then that each of those dots are then tracked 240 times per second. Their positions are tracked 240 times a second. And then the positions are just numbers. They're dimensional coordinates in 3 dimensions. So up, down, side to side, front to back, right? So there's just a number. So there's 3 numbers associated with each marker 240 times per second. So multiply that out, and then with that, you then calculate, okay, what is the whole skeleton doing? What are these different pieces? Like all this different stuff. And you start to add layers on, and there's a whole bunch of numbers involved in that. So it's not just one person, it's then tens of thousands of people that you're then monitoring. So when you talk about data, that's, I think, where people's heads go, is that. And I think the problem that people run into is they think they're going to find the truth in those numbers and in all that data. And what I think you end up finding is you get more information to ask better questions, because you're never going to get the whole understanding. Like, okay, we look at biomechanics, right? What are we looking at? We're looking at where are the bones at every point in time. But throwing is not just bones. Throwing is a whole bunch of other things. Your neurological system, like your brain sending signals to the muscles, your actual muscles, your connective tissue, like all these different things are involved there too. So you don't get any of that information. So what I thought initially, and what I think a lot of people think, is like, oh, the biomechanics lab, you're going to be able to solve mechanics. And it's like, no, it just it made us ask way better questions, like way better. So it's like, oh, okay, this moves in this way. I wonder if that means that the connective tissue is responsible for this, because like it happens at this speed, which you can calculate in there, and it moves in this way and that way. So yeah, the whole thing is like, I think what I realized with data, because you're right, when I was younger, I didn't have access to all these different numbers. And I was very much, okay, I just feel the throw and I work in feels and that's it. I think most baseball players work in feelings and emotions. And then I got access to the numbers, and then I realized how I could combine those. And it put me in a really powerful position, because you have access to more information, more perspectives. So then I was like, oh, it's really important that I have the perspective of someone who can throw hard and a baseball pitcher, and the perspective of someone who understands baseball biomechanics from a interpreting the data perspective. Then I add on top of that my understanding of strength and conditioning. Then I add on top of that my understanding of rehab principles. Then all these things start to come together and then give you a much bigger picture. And that bigger picture then allows you to solve really cool problems and make good decisions, because that's all training is, just making decisions. Like, what do I need to get better at? You made a decision there. How am I going to do it? You made a decision there. Should I change when this happens? You made it like, oh, they're just decisions. So the more information that you have there, the better decisions you can make. And the data is one piece in that, but it's very important. It's one piece in it. And there's a lot of other things that go into it as well.
How important do you believe then? And by the way, when I meant data, and I loved the fact that you dove into that, because I do agree. I think a lot of people over dramatize that word and think that provide its own sort of context even, right? And I think the bigger issue is that when they do that, they ignore some of the basic data that they already have access to.
Yes.
Or that they could already get from themselves. As simple as a nutrition log, right? Like, so to some of our top players, and then even some of our novice players that are becoming better, right? One of the first questions I'll ask them when I see them that day is, hey, how much protein have you had today? Just because it's a simple number for them that they could accurately be assessing on a regular basis.
Sure.
And, it's a lower hanging fruit that they could probably be tackling, right? Same thing as, what'd you weigh this morning, right? And tracked it then, or so on and so forth. But those are all data points, and they drive the point I think that you made that was the best there is they just drive better problem solving.
Yeah.
And that's the real key at the end of the day. And anybody that tells you when they're writing a program or when they're providing something to you that this will get you to point Z and we promise it's going to take X amount of time is lying.
Yeah.
Because if they did have that figured out and they had that solution, just understand then the goal you're asking for is probably not that extreme.
Yeah.
Because, are they just basically telling you we can get you to gain 5 pounds? Yes, pretty much anybody can get you to gain 5 pounds if they just understand basic biochemistry.
Sure.
But, I think transitioning forward now into how, now that you're working with people, right? And, you mentioned before that your niche has now become sort of this returning an athlete back. Let's go into this data point, right? I'm gonna dive into this a little bit from questions that I think, others might have, right? Which is like, okay, hey, you've had these enormous amounts of injuries, right? And you have this extensive wealth of knowledge, of experience, and being around all these different people. But, what then empowers you to say, I feel like I have the best mechanism to getting you back to playing as you are still in that path?
Sure. I try and look at, and I do this with a lot of things, I try and look at what has been done before is important, but it's not the sole reason you should do something is because it's been done before. So I try and look at every problem. I try and identify what is this problem. I want to know and understand the problem. And I want to know and understand what it is we are trying to do. So when you talk about a return to throw, what is a return to throw? It's a progression of stress. It doesn't heal the injuries. We've obviously talked about this a lot. It does not heal the injury. It's just a progression of stress to take you.
Hone in on that for a moment. Go ahead, because I think that's a big misconception that I think a lot of people have, right? Is that, I'm going to try a non-operative approach. Let's even say that, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to try a non-operative approach and I want to use this to heal the injury.
Yeah, that's not how it works. Your body does the healing, and all you can do is apply a stress to that area. So it's a whole process. You have your stress, you have your recovery, you have your adaptation. and this is something, if I'm saying this and you guys have no idea what I'm talking about, YouTube it, because it's really important to understand. This whole stress recovery adaptation process. You apply a stress, your body, which could be anything. It could be, if you're trying to get better at bench pressing, it could be bench pressing, doing push-ups, whatever, right? It could be throwing, it could be any of these things. You apply a stress that breaks down different structures in your body, and it sends the signal to your body that like, hey, yo, these structures that we broke down, we need to build those up in these very specific ways. So then the recovery process is your body actually sending building blocks to those places to build it back up, to get better at the things that you did. And then adaptation refers to anything that you built that you didn't have before. So if you were like level 100 in this specific thing before, and you did something, it took you down to like 95 for a little bit, and then it brought you back up to like 102, that too is an adaptation that you built. The recovery, obviously, from 5 to 100, and adaptation is from 100 to 102. So that's what you're trying to do. That's training. That's rehab. That's taking your body and becoming something different, is the stress recovery adaptation process. So when you understand that, it's like, and this is kind of the answer to the question that you ask, is how do you feel like you're kind of good at what you do, or good at how do you know that you're right in bringing people back?
Sure,
Or
yeah.
to throws? Is just because like I just understand the problem. The problem is like you had this initial injury, and I understand what should be happening at different points in time. So the injury should get healed. Now, what happened during the healing? Did you take your time off and your body did the recovering process? Did you have a surgery? Like what happened, you know? And that all puts you in a different spot. And then between that spot, and so that spot is now defined, you are here, and you're trying to get to back and playing. So then you define back and playing, which is like, okay, I'm a reliever, I top 100, I'll throw 15 pitches per outing 3 times a week. Great. You right now just had Tommy John. You're 6 months out, about to start your return to throw process, and throwing 50 miles an hour hurts. So it's like, we have where you're starting, we have where you're going, and then we need to just slowly build piece by piece and get you all the way back there. So we apply a stress, your body recovers, then it adapts. We apply a stress, your body recovers, and then it adapts. And it happens over and over and over and over and over. And all these different structures in your body, whether it's the muscle, whether it's a tendon, a ligament, the bones, neurological, sending signal from the brain to the muscles to fire, mechanically, which is just a sequence of firing. When do you fire what muscle at what time? All those things have their different appropriate levels of how do you train them, and it has appropriate levels of like how much do you train them, how often, how long does it take for them to recover, and that's all a program is you're balancing all of that within the context of the individual athlete. So you and I are not going to recover at the same rate at different things.
Yep.
And sometimes we could do the same exact thing. Like no one activity just stresses one of these systems. So they all stress multiple, sometimes all, mostly all. So you may, let's say we're taking bench press, for example. There's a possibility that you could recover faster than me on the muscle side of things, and there's a possibility that I could recover faster than you on the neurological side of things. So, okay, we both did a bench press, and we both did it at a certain intensity for a certain volume, or a certain amount of sets. But like we could recover at different rates with different systems. So that's all I'm doing in a return to throw process is identifying, okay, where are you now? Where do you need to go? What is the typical timeline for something like that? And why is it that? What structures need to get built and how are we going to build them? And then every time we go through that stress recovery adaptation cycle, I'm paying attention to what's going on. How long did it take you to recover? How did your body accept that stress? How is it adapting? And then that helps us frame out exactly how your body wants to recover in terms of timelines, and in terms of the dosing of how much stress do we give and how often, and all these different things. So that's kind of a really deep explanation of like, I just understand the problem. And it doesn't matter what's been done before. It does matter what's been done before because that helps you kind of get
it provides
understanding.
context.
Yeah, it provides context, exactly. But when you understand the problem, you're able to then attack those problems directly. And that's how we've gotten some really good results from doing that.
Very cool. Very pragmatic, very systematic too. And it what's really interesting there is if I rewind, just listening to you talk about how you approach everything you're doing, they sound very similar, right?
Yeah.
It seems to your acceptance, right? Rationalization and then action system that you've basically built your life on is now underpinned in your programming as well, which makes total sense, right? And it is very logical.
Yeah. I've seen too many guys hold themselves back and not be able to achieve what they could achieve because they're doing things that are wrong, because they don't understand just at any point that they could make a decision, they were just wrong. So in identifying what is the goal, they were wrong, because they thought in their head that the goal was to be a big leaguer, but in reality, their actual goal was just to look cool and be accepted by the people around them. So then, okay, you're going to act differently because your goals are different. And that's just one simple example.
Your actions are not going to match your identity.
100%. Yeah. And then, but it then goes into the next thing. Okay. What do we need to do to get better? Well, I need to throw harder. What are you talking about? You top 98 and you walk 9 people per 9. What do you mean you need to throw harder? How is that possibly the thing you need to do? And then there's all these different things. Anytime they make a decision, they make the wrong decision.
Well, because what they're struggling with, which is something that you seem to be almost sort of organically good at, and maybe all these struggles made it that way, which is they suffer with accepting where they're at and then being able to rationally make a decision from there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And that might be why they're making this wrong choice.
All the time. Holy cow. That hit it on the head. There's so many people that I see that make decisions out of comfort instead of out of what is the actual goal. And what I mean by that, a really common one is, you know what feels really good? Progress. So it's really easy to be like, oh, I'm going to go train strength, for example, because it's easy to make progress in strength. Now, I'm not saying training strength is bad, but for the guys that let's say somebody back squats 400 pounds and they throw 92. Do we need to squat 420 pounds?
It's probably the last thing they need to work on.
Exactly. But they will make progress on that squat. So it's really easy. Well, I want to feel good about myself. I want to go. So then they go and train the squat. And then they still throw 92. Or maybe they throw a little bit slower because they took themselves in the wrong direction. So it's just all these different things. They just make the wrong decisions. And I'm not afraid of making the wrong decisions. I've just seen how bad it can be when you make bad decisions at all these different, because there's so many layers involved of this whole thing. And if there's 5 layers involved and you're 1 degree off with your decision on all 5 layers, you're going to be really off when you get to the end.
So this is another reason why a mentor is so crucial. So oftentimes when people struggle to make those decisions, it's decisions about themselves. And I'd be lying if I didn't have an enormous amount of those throughout my life as well, right? But it's very easy to rationalize somebody else's situation. It's very easy to look at them and pragmatically say, hey, no, this is how we have to address this. This is so obvious. Why do you not see this?
Yeah.
And this is really where a mentor can come in, because they can sit down and look at the whole picture and say, well, wait a minute, dude, like, you can't come at me with all these emotional things. I can't tell you how many times I've had phone calls from guys in pro ball that are calling me up. You know, they're landing in AAA and their first words are, I need to throw harder. And I'm like, okay. And they're like, yeah, but, you know, and I'm absolutely dominating everything and I'm continuously moving up levels. And I'm like, okay, so maybe us throwing harder isn't exactly what we need to look at. Let's start to look at some of these other areas where we might be able to adjust certain things and get ourselves in a position where, you know, now we can really capitalize on the situation we have created for ourselves. Let's dive in a little bit deeper to the choice of comfort. You know, in just some offline chats that we've had, right? And it's difficult when passion drives you or obsession drives you, right? Which we know we've both leaned on and allow it to fuel us. Communicating with others or your circle becomes smaller. Let's put it that way, right? And I know I'm difficult as hell to work with, for whatever, however you want to term that. And I've had people that, we've separated ties, and it infuriates me in that moment. It doesn't infuriate me though, because we've lost this person and like that they're a key member and blah, 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 and all that horseshit, because we'll be fine. But it infuriates me because I wasn't able to get that person to admit that they want to be the greatest they can be. And I think obsession is such a important piece to wanting to be great. And I just love for you to sort of shed light on how that's worked in your life.
Sure. I think a lot of people talk about and say they want to be as good as they can be. And I think they say that because it's acceptable, it's cool, it's you get this feeling from other people, this positive feedback of like, oh, you want to be as good as you can be, that's great. But then also in the same breath, they talk about this is not they, this is me too, being like, well, I also want to be comfortable. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that doesn't exist. If you want to be as good as you can possibly be in anything, it's terrible at times. It's horrible. You put in a huge amount of work. You don't get to go do fun things at certain periods of time, right? You have to make sacrifices. You have to make decisions. You have to be disciplined. It's easy. I'm thinking back to my time when I was in high school. I really enjoyed playing video games. Call of Duty was the one I played all the time. It's really easy and really fun to have all the guys over. We'll order pizza, and then we'll play video games until 5 a.m. And then we'll fall asleep when we fall asleep, and we'll wake up and we'll do it again, right? Like that's fun and easy, and also directly gets in the way of me being as good as I can possibly be at the thing that I want to do, which is pitching.
Yeah, and I think what's so interesting to that, right, is society will actually aid in you choosing comfort.
100%, yeah, because you're supposed to be comfortable,
yeah,
right? But and I agree with that to a point, but anything to a point is bad. Obviously, the stress and hardship to a point is bad. It broke me. I was in a terribly catabolic state, just like breaking down all the time. I was fat and miserable and slept terrible and all these problems, right? But then on the other side, too much comfort is also really bad because you become weaker and worse as a person. And yeah, it's nice when you get to rest in the moment, but over time, you will degrade. You're going to lose what's been built up, whether that's mental ability, whether that's physical ability, all these different things. You're going to lose those things because the whole body works in a stress recovery adaptation cycle. So everything works in that. And people ask me all the time,
including your psychology.
Yeah, all of it, everything. Everything is a stress recovery adaptation process. Everything.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that because most of the time when you say the body, human, like everybody else listening is going to be like, just my physiology.
I mean, think about like, okay, let's do a hard thing and let's do it for 1 minute. And that was hard today. Yeah. And tomorrow I'm going to do a hard thing, but I did it for 2 minutes. Yeah. And it was just as hard to do in the 1 minute. And then the next day I do it, so I have my stress, which is doing the hard thing. I have my recovery, which is the time in between that and, and whatever. But I get asked all the time, what is the most important part? Is it the stress or is it the recovery? And it's like, no, the most important part is nailing both of them. Mm-hmm. That's the most important part, is being able to do the stress when you need to do the stress, being able to recover when you need to recover, and being dynamic enough and having control enough of yourself to know when you need to do either one. Great example. Let's say I'm super stressed out, using the example I just used with playing video games, right? With the boys, is like, okay, let's say I'm incredibly stressed out. Life is really hard. Like parent may have just passed away, maybe doubling down on like this money problems and like we don't know where a meal's coming from, like some really, really hard problems, right? Is it a great idea for me to double down on not going and playing video games with the boys? It's a terrible idea because I have a huge amount of stress happening in my life and I need some of that recovery. I need to step back from it and recover from those things, right? And have some fun and relax. And now, is it a good idea for me then to not get any sleep that night? No. There's always balance to these things, right?
Sure.
But just showing the duality of it. Now, if I'm in a period of time in my life where everything is great and I'm crushing it and I'm loving life and I'm happy and I'm working my butt off at the same time, now is it a great idea for me and then go, instead of going and training and doing the work that I need to do, to go and play video games with the boys? No, it's a bad idea because I have all the recovery that I need. I need to go apply the stresses that I need to apply to then get closer to the things I need to get closer to. So understanding that whole thing, I think, is gigantic. And being able to take yourself back and not operating out of emotion. Because if you operate out of emotion and what's comfortable, you're going to pick the easy thing every time. And when you pick the easy thing every time, you then don't have control over what you will become and what you're doing. And it's going to trend towards bad. You will not be the best version of yourself. You won't even be close. You will be, you're essentially going to degrade into someone who's not able to produce very much at all or produce any sort of value. And that's a problem. As a kid, you don't really see the problem. But as an adult, obviously, with a family, and a wife and kids and a house, and you now employ however many dozens of people that you employ that now depend on you, you understand what it means to be someone who provides. Because without all these systems, there's a very large handful of people that then suffer from it. And that's what I really think the point of life, without getting too deep into it, is just like, what can you be in the thing that you want to do and in the stuff that you, and not just the thing you want to do, not just on the baseball player, but also like, how good of a boyfriend and future husband to Nicole can I be? How good of a son to my dad and my mom can I be? How good of a friend to the people around me can I be? How good of a mentor to the guys where I'm training can I be? How good of a baseball player can I be? All these things. I want to become better at all those things because I think that is the point. Is like, what is the stuff that is one correct to do? Being a good person, providing, all those things, right? Be good at all those. And then also there's these things that like you want to do in life that you like have this natural pulling towards and natural abilities towards. And it's like, I really do feel that if you don't sell out for those things, that you're missing the point. And I think you're going to be drastically disappointed with yourself when you get to the point where it's time to collect the check and then you see how much is written on the check, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So when it's time to collect the check of my baseball career, I know, and what I mean by that is like not just the money, but realize like, okay, what did I get out of this whole thing?
Sure.
If I didn't put very much in and the check is very small, I'm going to be really disappointed. But if I put a lot in and the check is small, it's okay. I know that that's all that the check was going to be, and I maximized what I could get.
Right, but that check, right, if we're going to use this as a sort of analogy or metaphor here, right, so...
It's a whole lot more than just money and success. And
So
I've learned to become a different person. So already the check that I've been given back is...
far outweighs any of the money you can make.
Close. Yeah. Not even close.
Right. And I think that's the bigger picture. And look, we, certainly we can spend time getting philosophical on this and continuously diving down these rabbit holes, right? But like the statements that come to mind when you're talking about these things is like, how you do anything is how you do everything, right? Mm-hmm. So you having this obsession to be a great baseball player spills into all these other areas. And kids listening are like, fuck that. Like, I'm not good in school and I'm just never going to be fucking good in school. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but be careful, because here's what I actually mean by that statement is taking that mentality there will actually start to spill into your mentality for baseball.
Yeah.
It doesn't just mean that, you suck at school, so, but I can really give a lot in baseball. It will creep in the other way.
Yeah.
And
because you're practicing either way.
Yeah, either way. Yeah, you're training practicing your brain and you're training your emotional system and you're training how you are going to react in situations always. Mm-hmm. I think back to a statement that I heard Derek Jeter make after one of the seasons when they lost in the World Series. And the guy asked him, hey, good year. And he goes, nah, we lost. So it's not a good year. It's a failure. And he goes, all right, but what about the fact that you beat all those other teams? And he was like, that was a lot of winning. And he goes, yeah, but winning just brings more misery, because it just means I have to suffer harder to be even better the following year. Mm. And the crowd laughed because they thought he was kidding.
Yeah, and he's just looking at it straight face.
He was actually perturbed by like their laughter, and he didn't understand why they would be laughing. And to me, that speaks to that guy's whole career. But like the ability to be that focused on things, I think speaks to why there's so few great people on this planet that accomplish such great things, because it's really fucking hard to do that.
It's insanely hard. And it's like I don't want to sit here and put on this persona that I choose the most difficult path at all points in time. Like, it just isn't the reality.
Right.
You know?
You'd also be miserable.
Yeah, you'd be miserable. So it's just like, but I have that goal, and I understand that I have my entire life to go at it, and I'm working towards it. And I think that's the point, is just like continuing to build towards it. At times, you're going to do the easy thing, right? It's okay, you know? But just understanding that, look, the point of this whole thing is not to just atrophy into nothing, is not just to seek comfort and atrophy into this like terrible mess of just waste, you know? The point is to continue getting better at these different things. And whatever it is that you choose and whatever speed that is for you, just keep moving in that direction. I think that's the point.
Yeah, it's everything is going to have a situational dichotomy, right? Where you could go either direction and you need to make a choice. And that's speaking back to what you talked about earlier, right? That comfort may be necessary in that moment in time for recovery, for mental recovery, right? And cognitive breaks. But
which is a huge realization for me.
Yeah, it's hard. Yeah. It's hard to come to terms with that when you want to be a warrior.
Yeah.
It's hard to come to terms with I have to peel back a little bit. And oftentimes when we have great athletes, and especially young great athletes, that's the job I spend more time in. You know, you've termed it before, but I think, you know, as performance coaches, we're often just stress managers. We're deciding how much stress should we be inflicting or allowing this person to inflict upon themselves, and how much stress do we need to relieve from this individual during this point in time.
Yep.
And I think those are really key points there. All right. So let's close this out with, you already hit on way earlier your advice, which would be, let's not put ourselves in a position to be injured.
Yes.
And let's quickly go into, though, what do you think some of the key metrics right now that an athlete could be following that could prevent them from putting themselves in that position?
Sure. Okay. So I'll try and keep it as simple as possible. It's tough to be both simple and thorough / correct.
Sure.
So I'll do my best to be as simple as possible. First thing, if you want to take anything away from this, is understanding that everything is a stress recovery adaptation cycle. Everything. That's the first thing. So it's not just, throwing is bad, or this activity is bad, or this is bad, or whatever is bad. It is a stress. Look at it completely independent of emotion. And look at that stress compared to what you are prepared to do. And I know people are going to say, well, how am I supposed to know what I'm prepared to do? You freaking know.
Yeah,
because
just look at what you've consistently done prior.
What have you done before? Do you think you're going to be incredibly sore from starting tomorrow? And they'll be like, oh, yeah. And it's like, yeah, you understand.
Well, I mean, we could even take it to sleep, right? Like for you right now, if you got 5 hours of sleep, what would that do to you?
Tank me.
Tank you.
Yeah.
For me, that's pretty close to my norm. So I'd wake up and probably be like, I'm all right. Not that that's good, but from the pattern that I've had, that's what my body has adjusted to.
Sure. So think about, you want to control the stress, or at least have an understanding of the stress that you are applying to your body. And what I mean by that, you can look specifically at throwing. It is obviously a terrible idea to start 2 games in a row. Today and tomorrow, I'm going to start both of them. I'm going to throw 9 innings in each. That's a terrible idea. Why? Because you applied a gigantic stress on day 1, and then you didn't have enough time to recover for day 2, right? And that's all that this really is. If you really want to understand how to keep yourself healthy over the long term, it's understanding how much stress that I apply today. And then one of the keys that I've found is like, whatever you think is comfortable, I take it 1 notch below that. That's it. Well, and that could be, there's kind of 4 main pillars that I use to like quantify throwing programs. And that's the peak intensity, so the hardest that you threw. The volume at peak intensity, so how many did you throw roughly around the hardest that you threw?
Based on the overall percentage.
Just like a total number.
Okay.
Total number. So like, let's say I was up to 90 miles an hour today. And let's say at 88 to 90, I threw 10 pitches.
Okay.
And then the next one is going to be the total volume on the session. So how many throws did I make today total? Let's say I made 70 throws today total. And then the frequency. So that's both how many sessions per week as well as how many higher intensity sessions per week. Quantify what you are doing from those perspectives. And that gives you the start for, okay, what am I in shape for? Because we did that before, and then you did that, whatever it is that you did throwing. And then how did it feel during the session? Did it feel like you were really taxing yourself, or did it feel like it was fine, or somewhere in the middle? And let's say it felt like you were really like one step below really taxing yourself. It's like, cool, all right. The next day, how did it feel? Well, I felt sore, but I wasn't like gonna die and nothing hurt. It's like, cool, all right. That seems like you applied a really good training stimulus and didn't take it too far. Awesome. And then you continue to like pay attention to how long does it take for you to feel fresh again. And that gives you an idea of like, how long does it take for me to recover? And now you have some guidelines.
Basis.
Yeah, you have some basis of just like, oh, okay, last time I threw 10 pitches between 88 and 90 miles an hour. And it took me 4 days to feel fully back to normal again to do that. Great. Next time, you could probably do 12 pitches at 88 to 90 miles an hour. Or you could do another 10 pitches at like 90 to 92. Or like you just take one step at a time. Just pick an area, pick one of those pillars and take one step at a time. And you'll just run into problems if you try and make these big jumps that you weren't ready for.
Right.
Because things like the whole stress recovery adaptation process works in tiny little increments. So you just continue to progress it in tiny little increments. And the reason that people don't do that is because they don't want to take that. They realize that,
time.
They realize that, if I want to do, if I want to go from here to here, then if I take tiny steps, I'm going to have to take a lot of steps. And that's going to take a lot of time.
Yeah.
So then what they do is they go from here to here in like 2 or 3 steps when they should have done it in 20. And then now they're hurt. And then in the amount of time it would have taken you to get there, you're now halfway through your injury. So that's the biggest thing I can give to people to take home.
What
really
I love
understand.
about that is there's clearly technology out there that could aid us in discovering some of those things.
And
Right?
it's simple as a radar gun.
Right.
Simple as a radar gun. And you can get, obviously, Pocket Radar, super cheap. I know you guys have a deal with them.
Yep.
I love it. It's awesome. Just have an idea of how hard you're throwing and roughly how many you threw and how often did I do that. And then think like, okay, how sore did I get? And then make good decisions based on that. Like it really doesn't take... It's like we talked about the meme, the bell curve, where it's like at the very beginning, it's like kind of simple. And then in the middle, it's like, oh, there's this and that and this and that. And at the end, it's just like pretty simple. It's like, that's it. And if you want to do that incredibly well, how I've learned to learn things better is to get with somebody where that's what they do. So you do this incredibly well. I do this incredibly well. Plenty of people do this incredibly well. Find somebody who does it incredibly well, pay them what it costs to pay them, have them do it for you and learn from them.
Yep.
That's it. And then guess what? When you learn from them, you'll also learn other things that you need to then, not only will you learn other things that are great, you'll also learn other things that you need to learn. Yep. So from listening to this podcast, you learned that you needed to learn this stuff. Yep. And then from having them coach you, you'll learn that you need to learn this other stuff. And it continues. And that's how it works.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, listen, thank you so much for today. This was an awesome convo. I really do hope people were even able to listen to it a couple times over so that they can hear so many of the nuggets that were in there that spoke to, what speaks deep to me is obviously a lot of the mindset stuff and how much that can transition just who you are, not just as an athlete, but as an individual. Making the mistake that being competitive is just for athletes. I promise you'll be sadly disappointed when you get into the real world and find out that it is a necessity for everyone.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you having me, man. Always love coming out here, love chatting with you. Always get so much out of us chatting. So appreciate it big time.
Thank you.